For the next 1 hour, Dr. David Lee, UDA Economic Advisor, author of the Economic Plan for the Kenya Kwanza Manifesto. Welcome to Kenya's Biggest Conversation.
Thank you.
That's the hot seat of the conversation. And it's good to have you on the show. We've heard you before, but you were joining us via video link when we were talking about the Linda Katiba movement and the case that you had before the court against the BBI. Now you're here, we're talking about the future.
Correct.
Not the past or present. It is going into the future. The Kenya Kwanza Manifesto was launched a couple of weeks ago. And of course, it was shared widely, and there were various they've been talking about it, all the campaigners, and also you've been talking about it on social media. Very many things that came out of that economic plan, and it basically starts with the main conversation around Kenya Kwanza, the bottom-up economic model. There are very many people who don't understand to date what the bottom-up economic model is, even those within the Kenya Kwanza coalition whom we've hosted here before. So, Dr. Ndi, as one who has authored this, what is bottom-up?
Thank you very much for having me live. It's my first time here. It's an impressive outfit. I think people do understand what it is because it's self-explanatory when you say bottom-up. What our experience has been is that the people at the ground, it resonates, even if they can't explain it technically. The elite have a problem. I think it's actually more of a mental block because it's not talking about them. In this country, and that's precisely what it's about. So the people at the bottom will say, yeah, even if we don't understand the technicalities, we know it's about us because we are the ones at the bottom. And the elite have a problem with that because this country has been very elite-centric. So I think it's a paradigm shift. That's the problem, not understanding what it actually means. If I explain what it is technically, we have this economy, and the reason why it performs below potential. Kenya is said to be an underperforming economy based on what its potential is seen to be. We keep asking, why did the Southeast Asian countries, who we seemed close to, leave us behind? Why are we being leapfrogged by other African countries that, despite seemingly having very vibrant sort of country, human capital, good location, all sorts of things, but you see huge incidences of poverty, hunger, all of that. Reason is we have a problem with capital. This country has a high concentration of capital, very concentration of capital, and the state is captured by the owners of capital. That's the political economy of it, and it's a colonial legacy. You find that a lot in common with the former European settler colonies. You see the same features in Zimbabwe, you see the same features in South Africa, you see the same features in the Philippines compared to other East Asian countries. And therefore you have an elite which has captured the state, which owns the capital, and therefore policies of the country are geared towards maximizing the return on capital, which is very concentrated, vis-a-vis creating jobs and incomes. So fundamentally, bottom-up is saying that our capital is concentrated where it increases profits by design, instead of where it should create jobs and incomes for the masses. If you create jobs and incomes for the masses, you have a bigger base. You have a bigger consumer base. And that consumer base is what then enables you to do very many things. It enables you to have a wide tax base, which you can then use to finance public services and all sorts of things. It obviously creates jobs. So we need to deconcentrate capital.
Interesting that you use the word deconcentrate. Does it then require redistribution?
No.
Because you say it's being held by the few. The estate is captured by the owners of capital. For you to then deconcentrate that capital, you've got to take it from those who are holding it now.
You know, the conversation around redistribution is usually about income. There is very little economic conversation about distribution of capital. I think this is one of the few national policy conversations I know about concentration of capital. We are the pioneers of this conversation. So you hear about redistribution of income using maybe taxation. But what we're saying here is something different. The capital, when you talk about the concentration capital, you don't have to take capital from anyone. The key to distribution of capital is finance. Yeah? Because capital is accumulated through finance. So if you look at what we are doing and our plan is actually talking about capitalizing the economy at the bottom of the pyramid. Because this is a nation of entrepreneurs. If you look at the structure of our labor force, over 3/4 of our labor force, of our workforce, works in micro and small enterprise and largely informal economy. But when you look at policy is made for the people at the top of the pyramid, who are only about 15% of the workforce. Of that, about 1/3 is in the public sector, only about 2/3. So you're saying of the formal wage private sector, people like yourself who are on formal payrolls, are only about 2 million, about 10% of the workforce. Another 1 million in public sector. 15 million are not on payroll. They are out there and you see them all the time.
Would I be simplistic if I said that what the narrative that you speak of sounds very socialistic?
It isn't. It's a very capitalist narrative. Again, that's another, you see, again, it's a mindset thing. As soon as you talk distribution, people think socialism.
And is it necessarily negative?
It is not negative, but in this particular case, we're talking about a nation of entrepreneurs.
Yes.
So enterprise is capitalist.
Must it be?
That's an ideological question at this point. We are talking about making markets work for everyone. What we have is markets which are rigged for a few. So this conversation is in the domain of the market. Socialism is in the domain of the state. Yeah, so there's nothing statist about this conversation. This conversation is saying we have where our workforce is not where our capital is. We have actually the most capital-intensive manufacturing industry at our level of development. It takes about a minimum of 1 million shillings, about $10,000, to create a formal manufacturing job in Kenya. Okay? In South Asia, the countries we're competing with, it's a tenth of that. It takes $1,000, $2,000. And therefore, for one job created in Kenya's manufacturing sector, you can create 5 jobs.
Why is it that disparity?
Because if you look at the structure of our industry, which is owned by the owners of capital, our single largest manufacturing export in Kenya is steel products. We are not a capital-rich country, so we should not be exporting steel. We should be exporting garments. Now, let me give you a simple illustration which we've been using. Not too long ago, Uhuru Kenyatta opened a gun factory. Okay?
The one in Ruiru?
The one in Ruiru. Yes. It cost 4 billion shillings. And he said that is going to create 100 jobs. So that is 40 million shillings per job. Not too long ago, Kitui County established a garment factory. That garment factory cost 170 million shillings or so, with a capacity of creating 600 jobs. So that's about 280,000 shillings per job. That's in the Bangladesh, India sort of capital intensity. So Uhuru's gun factory, if we had put that money in garment factories like Kitui's, would have created 14,000 jobs. Now, if you create 14,000 garment factory jobs, the typical output per worker of an EPZ garment factory, either in Kenya or Bangladesh or Vietnam or wherever, is about $10,000. It's about $1 million shillings. So if this was an export industry, it would that capital would have been created enough jobs to generate $300 million worth of exports. Mm-hmm. Our current garment export, which is our third largest export sector, is doing $500 million. So if Uhuru Kenyatta had just raised that capital from whichever investors and encouraged them to put garment factories, it would have increased our garment exports from $500 million to $800 million. So it's choices we make consciously. We are still making capital-intensive choices because that is the mindset of the people who run the country. They don't think, what is the opportunity cost of this capital that we are putting in this sector? How many jobs would it create? If you read the literature on Southeast Asia, you read Lee Kuan Yew's book, you read quite a bit of the Malaysian literature, you see a very serious preoccupation at the time. They were asking, how do we create jobs for our people?
Would you say, David, that the current situation, still looking at this economic model, which you're hoping to then come and institute, the current situation is that this base of individuals in the country, this base of the work or business force, is then operating in the wrong jobs if we're going to be looking at making profits through which you then create a larger tax base? Are they in the wrong sector?
What do you mean? I didn't get you.
Are they in the wrong sector? Because if we're saying the funding is not being applied to the sectors that would essentially make money for the government, very simply put.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
So
we don't making money for the government. You're making income, jobs and incomes for the people. Government is secondary.
Is that happening right now?
Well, we are putting 800,000 people in the workforce every year. Mm-hmm. We have a huge youth bulge, like the rest of Africa. Of those 800,000 people, the formal economy, the corporate economy, only absorbs about 50,000. Then you have what you might call, so if you put a pyramid, I call that the white collar. The white collar economy only absorbs about 50,000 out of 800. Then what we call blue collar, that is the formal micro, small enterprise type economy, does another 150,000. Okay? And there you're talking about creating jobs at about 200,000 shillings per job. Up there you're talking 1 million, 2 million. Then 600,000 are joining the ranks of those who actually don't make enough money every day just for basic needs. Okay? And that number is already about 10 million. So every year, another 600,000. If we don't do anything, in 5 years, that number will be going to 13, 14 million. Okay. Now, those people, there's no difference between them because they're all living the same school system, and the ones who get into the formal or into the white collar and blue collar. I call this lot no collar. The people getting to the no collar, there's no difference between the ones that were getting into blue collar and white collar. The difference is lack or connections. If you're well connected, you get into the white collar. If you're not well connected, but you're lucky, you get into the blue collar. If you are unlucky, you end up on the streets in what we call the lottery economy. You wake up in the morning, you don't know whether you're going to be selling soap or crisps or bananas on the streets of Nairobi. It's pata-potea. That's why gambling is a big deal, because life is a gamble. Now, we're saying this is Kenya's most wasted resource. Because these people have any country where you have a secondary school educated workforce. That's the level of economic takeoff, of industrial takeoff. But we're wasting ours because we are building gun factories. That's the point.
When you talk about high concentration of capital, and you say this is our problem currently, how is it manifesting itself? How can we go out there and tell everybody this is where the problem is? This is how the high concentration of capital, the state capture by the owners of capital is actually manifesting.
Let me tell you how it affects. I've just given you one decision. Let me give you another one. It's right next to, it's called an expressway. Okay, if you look at how much this expressway has cost, it has cost more than it has cost Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, to build a BRT, a mass transit system. It has cost more than it cost Ethiopia to do a metro. And the Ethiopian metro was built by the same company, China Road and Bridge, that has built this expressway. So why did we build an expressway instead of a metro? The reason why we have built an expressway instead of the metro is because the expressway is not for us. It is not for your average Kenyan. There has been a lot of complaints by the UN and the diplomatic community about the traffic gridlock between the airport and the blue zone. And you know that is where the property wealth of the Kenyan elite is concentrated. And that is now being expanded to cross Thika Road and join up with this new development called Northlands. Okay, so the expressway, its target market is to enable those people coming to the UN conferences and all sorts of things, and people who they want to sell Northlands to be able to get from the airport to where they are going in 15 minutes. They really don't care about the gridlock on the ground because they don't see it.
Will it ease the gridlock on the ground?
No, it's not meant to. The gridlock on the ground is your problem. The people who are making that decision want to increase the value of their properties by attracting making Nairobi a bigger international hub.
But you're making it sound, David, as if they actually created a metro or a BRT like the Dar es Salaam one, they would not enjoy the same benefits.
No, they wouldn't, because the BRT is for Wananchi. It is not for some people coming for a UN conference who can get from airport to Gigiri in 15 minutes. They're not going to take the BRT. So this is an express way from the airport to Gigiri. I'm not making this up. It's on paper. The representations by the international community, and I think that's part of their condition to expand Nairobi as position as a hub. We are moving the KTTC college, which is next to the UN, so that we can give that land to the UN, and we continue expanding that international enclave.
I'm almost hearing you say as though, certain parts of the economy, certain part of the country essentially has been captured to suit certain individuals and how they will continue to do business in the country.
Yes, and we are not the only country which does this. If you go to Jamaica, they've done exactly the same thing. You have the tourist enclave to the sort of, I think, east of the island. And it's complete enclave. It has its own airport. And then you've got downtown Kingston, which used to be a war zone. But the elite, so the people go to Jamaica as tourists, and they have absolutely no idea what's going on in downtown Kingston. So this enclavist thinking by post-colonial elites is not peculiar to Kenya. I said you see it also in the Philippines.
We'll continue the conversation after this quick break. We're having a conversation with the UDA economic advisor, Dr. David D. He's an economist. He's a man who has participated greatly in authoring the Kenya Kwanza manifesto, in also authoring just the thinking of the Kenya Kwanza campaign, the bottom-up economic model. That's what we want to understand. What is this manifesto basically saying? Break it down for us. What do I add in the simplest of terms? What is the economic plan in the Kenya Kwanza manifesto? 29 minutes after 8.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
This is the Situation Room. Kenya's biggest conversation on SpiceFM online, YouTube, Facebook, www.spicefm.co.ke. We are also live on KTN Home and KTN News. Our guest this morning is Dr. David Ney, economist. He is the UDA Economic Advisor, Kenya Kwanza Economic Advisor, also man integral to the authoring of the Kenya Kwanza Economic Manifesto, the plan. Much of what you have told us, Dr. Ney, is what is actually contained in the manifesto itself, from the very introduction by Dr. William Ruto to the implementation plan, talking about what it's costing us to create one job versus what it should be costing us if we reconcentrated our capital at the bottom. And getting to understand this and getting to understand what it all means. If you look at what you said, the high concentration of capital has been benefiting the few owners of capital because their primary focus is profit. They get incentives so they can maximize their profit. Tax incentives, investment incentives, ease of accessing capital. So how would we make it easier for what you're calling the common man, the no-collar person, to get this capital so that they can then start generating income?
Let me distinguish two words in economics which confuse people: finance and capital. In economics, when we talk about capital, we actually mean physical things. We mean the productive assets. So capital is equipment. It is factories, it's buildings, it's machines,
It's human beings.
it's human, it's farm,
It's land.
it's land, it's improved land. It's land, not land itself, but once you put
idle land.
No. It's once you put irrigation in, the irrigation is the capital. Yeah. So that's what we mean by capital.
Okay.
So the question is, how is it financed? It can be financed. It's fundamentally financed from savings, whether yours or somebody else. If it's somebody else, then it's a loan or that investment. It might be an equity investment. It can be FDI or it can be money borrowed abroad. Whatever the case, it is financed by some savings. So the fact that we're saying capital is concentrated, it doesn't mean that these people have put in their own money. It means they have cornered the savings of the country or used their positions, leveraged their positions in government to attract FDI or to borrow money and channel it in their enterprises.
Right.
So that's the connection between capital and finance. So what we need to do is look at finance. How do we then enable the people at the bottom to accumulate capital, as we say in economics? The smallholder farmers to have the equipment and the working capital to be able, and the livestock and the good quality livestock and all that sort of stuff. The Juakali people to be able to have the equipment to be productive. So if you look at the plan, we have said we are first going to do the following. If you look at what has happened over the last decade, in order to channel public infrastructure to make the existing capital more profitable, we have gone to the banks and borrowed all the money. So when you hear the language of saying that we want to bring down the cost of doing business, infrastructure to bring down the cost of doing business, that is the language of improving the existing bottom lines. It is not the language
Of expanding and
of
creating new ones.
expanding and creating new ones.
Okay.
Okay? So we want to move our public money, the money, because this is debt. We have crowded out the private sector, and the most crowded out are agriculture and SMEs. Those are the ones who have been the brunt of the crowding out, so that the capital can go to the expressway, so that the capital can go to the SGR, the finance can go to the SGR, so that the cost of doing business for the existing capital is reduced and the bottom lines increase. They're not creating new jobs. They're just reducing their cost of doing business, and that goes to the bottom line. So what we're saying is that we begin by reversing this process. So the state has been crowding out agriculture and small businesses. So if you look at the plan says of the money that the state is borrowing, for the next 5 years, we are going to take 500 billion shillings, 250, put it in finance for small businesses, and 250 as finance for smallholder farmers. And the way we're going to put this money is we are not putting it so that we finance them one-off. We are going to create a capital base at the bottom, a lending base. So if you look at our financial system, today it has big banks which lend to big people. Then we have things we call microfinance banks and other sort of things. They also lend to small business sometimes, but those who have collateral.
Yep.
You need security. The people at the bottom have been reduced to Fuliza and Shylocks. Because now 14,000 accounts of people, mostly of people at the bottom, are registered with the CRB as defaulters. So when this person gives you services, and you are about to pay them, they tell you, no, don't send to that number. that number has Fuliza on it. Okay? So that tells you that there's a problem down there. They have actually now, first of all, you crowd them out of the formal system, and then you open them up to predatory lending.
Let me understand you, Dr. Ray. You're saying the crowding out involves taking capital.
Finance.
Finance, sorry.
Savings,
Thank you.
Taking
Finance,
savings.
Thank you. Finance from where it is most needed and being put into projects such as the SGR and the expressway. And this happens through what we may call domestic borrowing?
Yes, both. But if you look at our debt, it's actually half and half.
Yes.
Domestic borrowing is half the debt. But here's the thing. 80% of the interest is on domestic debt. If you look at the current financial year, our budget for interest is 600 billion shillings plus. It's the single largest recurrent budget item. It's bigger than the wage bill of the national government now. It was a quarter. It is now bigger. Of that 600 plus billion, 500 is domestic interest. So it means
So this is money going to our banks.
So if banks are making 500 billion by just lending to the government,
Why would they bother with you?
and sitting pretty, why would they bother with you? Okay? They don't bother with you. And if they lend to prime customers who they are lending at the same rates as government. Safaricom and big and EABL and other people who they have big balance sheets, the risk, very low risk people. They don't lend to high risk people. And of course, the lower you go, the higher the risk. So these people, they do lend to them. So they lend to them through Fuliza. Which charges them 6% per day, which they call a fee. It's not even an interest rate. If you calculate what you call an APR, annual percentage rate of 6%, it's 1,800% per year.
Hey.
And every one of those little guys has it. And when you are then put in the Credit Reference Bureau, you can't borrow there, you are locked out. Now you go to Shylocks in the market. And those ones lend you at 10% per day. So Kenya has become a mecca for these people called fintechs. You hear the fintechs? And you even hear the central bank now has become quite concerned about them, and you are beginning to talk about regulating them. Because they're making huge amounts of money here, because of our mobile phone, because of our mobile platforms, our poor people are accessible to these fintechs. And we've now become, and they are hoovering that money and taking it out of the country. So that's our biggest intervention is saying, look, this is, if you look at who is being crowded out, agriculture, smallholder agriculture has been crowded out completely. And that's the actually productive base of this economy.
Doc, let me ask you this question. If I may go down memory lane. There were institutions like Agricultural Finance Corporation. There were institutions like Kenya Industrial Estates that dealt with this mwananchi that we speak of. Were they completely, did they die and were buried completely, or the idea that...
When we liberalized, we threw the baby out with the bathwater. We said that it's not the business of government to do banking. But we forgot that the reason why government got into it is because finance and the credit markets have very severe market failure problems. And the worst is in agriculture. Agricultural market lending, even if you go to the West, if you go to Canada, government still lends farmers money. Yeah, but we threw the baby out with the bathwater. We left our farmers at the mercy of formal banks. A farmer should not go to the bank to borrow money at interest for a seasonal crop which takes 5 or 6 months, because if they're paying interest, they're being charged interest monthly. By the time the crop matures, there's nothing left for the farmer. Interest has consumed the farmer's margin. So you don't see any country which exposes the farmers to borrow from the seasonal credit from the banks for working capital. So what we're planning to do is capitalize the cooperatives and other farmer collectives to play the role that you're talking about, which used to be there.
The AFC role.
That AFC was also quite a bit elite. It didn't, and now the market is too big. And now we have, in Kenya, we have a very successful, over the years, we have managed to build a very successful cooperative system, SACCO movement. So we do have instruments that operate down there that we can actually use. So what we do, we go to the farmers' cooperatives, we create, so this money we are talking about creating, putting in agriculture, what we are doing is that the biggest job we are going to do is farmer organization, where they are not organized. Where they are already organized, we're saying, how many farmers, like let's give you an example of how we are going about it. You take a dairy cooperative. We've calculated that a farmer needs a working capital of about 4,000 shillings per cow to be able to buy animal feed and stuff like that on a monthly basis, on a revolving basis. So a cooperative has 1,000 cows. It doesn't matter the number of farmers.
It doesn't matter the members.
It matters the number of cows, because that's what you are financing. And it did working capital of per cow. So that cooperative is entitled to a very soft loan facility from our funds of 4 million shillings. Once this cooperative gets these 4 million shillings, it buys inputs. It can keep an inventory. It's working capital for that cooperative. It then gives those farmers the inputs on credit, which is what farmers cooperatives do. And then when the farmers sell their milk to the cooperative, they deduct the inputs. So if you see our biggest successful agricultural collective called KTDA, that's exactly that. Because it is very liquid, it has a lot of working capital, it's able to import fertilizer in bulk for all the tea farmers. It is able to give the tea farmers this fertilizer on credit, and only charge them once a year when they pay them what they call a bonus. So tea farmers don't feel the cost of fertilizer. And that's the model we want to replicate for every other farmer. That's the purpose. It's not rocket science.
Okay, David, I'm just looking at this that you're saying, and obviously, clear, making sense, right? But then we cannot run away from the corruption and impunity question in this country. That there may have been plans, there may have been policies that have been put in place before, KTDA, for example, other examples that worked really well in this country, but unfortunately then were subjected to the cancer of corruption. Where does this fall in moving forward?
Corruption is a very lazy excuse. It's a totally intellectually lazy argument. We have reduced very complex issues to animal farm logic.
How so?
Two legs bad, 4 legs good. So as long as you mention corruption, then you cannot have a conversation about anything else because it is the only thing. It isn't. Let's start with, as I said, KTDA is very successful. It is one of the most successful farmer collectives in the world, not just in Kenya. It controls 20% of the world black tea market, grown by smallholders who produce the highest quality tea in the world. It is studied by everybody who wants to understand agricultural collectives. It is still going. It is now being able even to finance power plants, hydropower plants, so that they can become net zero. It's doing very sophisticated
Despite corruption
things.
allegations within
Despite,
KTDA.
though they had no corruption problem fundamentally within KTDA because it is a completely private entity
Okay.
owned by farmers.
Okay.
What you have is designs to recapture it by cartels. Because the cartels want to capture particularly those fertilizer contracts because they're really big. The cartels want to be able to the ones to do those hydropower projects. The cartels want to be the ones to be tea brokers. They already own quite a lot of the tea brokerages.
Okay, so David, if I can interject there, if we're going to use the intellectually lazy term, as you call it, corruption, and put it aside and say then, how then would you deal with these cartels, which clearly have been a negative influence on economic development in this
they're the
country?
bane of our existence.
How do you deal with
By
it across sector?
By precisely, if you listen to what we are saying, we want to deal with farmer-owned organizations in agriculture. So if you look at the most successful, out of tea, we used to have something called KCC. It was very successful. At some point, a friend of mine who worked there surprised me. He was in the 80s. He told me in the mid-80s, they actually wanted to buy Nestle globally. Because-
KCC of
Yes,
Kenya.
KCC of Kenya.
They had
wanted
the
to-
muscle.
They had the muscle to buy Nestle. They wanted to do an LBO of Nestle. And they were close to doing it. Nestle wasn't as big as it is now. They were a very big exporter of milk and milk dairy products to the Middle East. It was then captured by the state and looted. It took the Kibaki administration, I was part of it, to reclaim it from whoever had captured it and actually boom. Now, if you look today, outside of the capture, the capture of the dairy industry by one big family, they have hoovered every private enterprise that was doing dairy. The sole survivors is KCC and one resistant dairy cooperative called Githunguri, which does fresher. And Githunguri, they have tried to capture Githunguri, and Githunguri people have told them, you do this, we'll come for you with pangas.
Okay.
That's the
So
same
this-
thing
this
that Ndu is
battle-
So
asking.
this is my question.
There are people up there, whether in whichever government comes in,
You-
who are well connected,
Yes.
who may take advantage of these brilliant plans that you have, Dr. Ndei.
The farmers have to fight for themselves. Okay? So the dairy farmers have to do what Githunguri has done. Okay? So we say we are going to support the dairy industry. We are going to support KCC as a federation cooperative. But you people also have to fight your battles. Okay? So this is the political economy of the country. It's not going to be, these guys are not going to lie down and sort of
Allow it to
roll
throw
over.
in the towel. They're not going to roll over.
So what safeguards do you have
you
in this
don't
manifesto?
you don't have safeguards. You use political power. Once you decide that your interests are aligned, you have aligned your interest with those of the people. You then take on cartels together with the people.
So
It
essentially,
is that's our transformation agenda.
It's a people power thing.
It's the people power. That's why we have gone. If you look at our political campaign, it has been about involving the people from the grassroots. That's why you've seen us doing all these town halls to sensitize the people. The people, we have to fight to empower ourselves.
David, does the person who is making the promisor of these matter? And I'm just going to read something that you said in 2018. William Ruto is a megalomaniac psychopath with no good needs, just an endless trail of death and destruction that will not end until he is stopped. This is the same promisor of these things that you speak of this morning.
I have said something equally nasty about practically every politician.
So it didn't matter?
No, it matters, but polemic. I think hyperbole is part of a political instruments. And quite frankly, I don't think that I wrote an op-ed several years ago about 2015, and I said that if you look at our political landscape and what distinguishes, there's about people as when Jubilee came to power, and a friend of mine called me and he said how rapacious this particular regime is and corruption and all sorts of things. And that struck me because I said all the regimes I know have been thoroughly corrupt. So what is so distinct about Jubilee? Because I was part of the Kibaki regime, and it hit the ground running with corruption, Anglo-listing within 6 months. So it is not corruption that distinguishes our regimes. Actually, I came to the conclusion that the distinction is incompetence. If you are corrupt and incompetent, then that combination is lethal. It is worse than, that's exactly what I said. The difference why Kibaki was seen as different is because, and Jomo to some extent, is because Kibaki and Jomo were corrupt but competent, while Moi and Uhuru are corrupt and incompetent. But the point is, what about, does the person matter?
Does the promisor matter?
It is. I come from the in terms of politics, I come from the self-interest school of looking at human nature as an economist. In economics, we call it public choice. And the public choice discourses, the person who invented it, James Buchanan, called it politics without romance. There is no romance. People are not in politics for the good of others or in whatever they do. They are in it for themselves. The question you have to ask, is the person who's promising, is his or her political interests aligned with what they are saying? If the interests are aligned, they will do it, because it is in their political interest to do
this
so.
thing works.
Themselves.
What happened to William Ruto is that he thought his path to power was through the system. And he invested heavily in the system, statecraft, through the boy system. He's an ambitious politician. Then the system spat him out. He encountered a class barrier. It has been a huge education for him because he was told you don't belong. He has told me the sort of things he used to be told. And in fact, it is his boss who gave him the name Hustle. And it was supposed to be a sort of...
It's a derogatory
dismissive
term. So he then finds that his path to power is with the people, which is where he should have been in the first place, because that's where he comes from. So the question is would it hurt him to do the things he's promising? Why would you sabotage your own political career if the things you are promising are actually the ones which are going to deliver whatever it is that you wanted? And I say, in my judgment, we have a very unusual alignment of the interests of the people and the interests of this particular promiser. Secondly, the other thing I've experienced, which I had not thought about before personally, and it struck me, I was actually quite surprised. I've been in Raila's campaign, I was in Kibaki's campaign, part of, the NDII campaign, and throughout, is everybody most people, actually 95% of people, including William Ruto, in particular UADA, are my generation and below. Actually, Gachagua and I are the oldest people in UDA because you are classmates. And William Ruto was behind us in university. So there is actually a fairly fundamental generational shift. And one actually experiences a shared worldview because we have the same experience. We went to the same schools. We make fun of each other's high schools. You know, people from Alliance make fun of people from Jiris, and people from Kangaro like myself make fun of people from Meru High School. You know, we have that kind of. And I think that social capital is very important. So that also means that there is no power distance between ourselves and William Ruto and whoever is likely. And therefore, there is a better chance of us seeing this as a collective goal of our generation.
Let's take
that
a break
we can
at this
deliver
point.
politically.
It's 9 o'clock. We've been live with Dr. David Ney. Time for us to get the news. We've also been live on KTN News and KTN Home. This is the Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation.